We're going to start with George Galloway.
On my left-hand side is Professor Steven Pinker.
Peter Hitchens, as you see, is very much present.
Professor Noam Chomsky, who one almost says needs no introduction, but of course immensely distinguished public intellectual.
Been a Labour MP, an MP for Respect.
Columnist for the Mail on Sunday.
Of Harvard University, one of the best-known public intellectuals in the world.
Could we invite you to lay out the moral position of the right, since we've had the left
I
chewed over?
don't speak for the
no, but you're
the right.
you're
I
a
would say my
tranchant
moral position
analyst.
is that morality is for individuals, but I do think that it's getting very hard in a society with an increasingly strong interfering state, a state which, in my view, intervenes very much on behalf of commerce and business. To make people's lives more and more subject to the needs of business, and whose cynical alliance with what I think is now fourth stage feminism is really all about getting as many women into the workplace as cheap, compliant wage slaves as it can possibly manage. I think this particular cynical alliance has done enormous damage to personal and private life in our country. I think that the basis of freedom in any country is private life, and I think the basis of private life is strong families. And I think that both commerce and the state dislike strong families intensely and want to get rid of them. And so we see this desert of 0 hours contracts and low wage jobs in which nobody can afford what a normal British working class family of the 1950s, 60s and 70s would have seen as normal, one income being enough to live on. So we all have to go out and slave for next to nothing. For global corporations, and this somehow has come into alliance with a cause which considers itself to be feminist. I do not disagree with anything anything at all in Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. I think it's an absolutely perfect statement of the feminist case. I don't think that feminism was ever about the destruction of family life or the regimenting of women into wage slavery. As it has become, and I think that
I agree with you.
Feminism actually was interested in the welfare of women, it wouldn't go down this road.
But then you just made the case. Surely you have just made the case against the politics of interest rather than a politics of morality.
I'm sorry, so could you say it again? I'm not sure I quite got it.
Haven't you just made the case against a politics which is defined by interest rather than with a moral compass?
I'm saying that a policy which presents itself as moral is in fact a policy of commercial interest and the pursuit of power, which is so very often the case. And this is what idealist politics is about. It presents hard commercial and political interests as a moral case, and people are fooled by it, and then they find afterwards that they were fooled. Well, I think it's too late, and I'm afraid that for about 20 years now, from my own position, originally believing that I could do some good, I put deliberately in front of people on the left, such as Chris, and many others, a series of objections to the policies they were pursuing, whether they were policies on education, whether they were policies on crime and punishment, whether they were policies on immigration. I said, these policies ignore so completely the real position and the plight, particularly of the poor in our country, that you are storing up for yourselves a great rebellion against you, which will be much less nice than I am. And you don't think I'm nice, so you wait and see. And I said this, and I said, I got nothing but scorn and rejection. And I can live with that personally. You know, my own life is blessed. It doesn't make any real difference to me, and I should be dead soon, so the consequences of it don't matter very much. But the truth was that I was genuinely trying to argue with the left, who had, it seemed to me, taken control of politics, the academy, the civil service, and the law. They had a responsibility to listen. Otherwise, they were risking something. This was Weimar, and they were risking something horrible afterwards. And now they have Donald Trump, and they don't realize it was their fault. And now they have the referendum result, and they don't realize it was their fault. To this day, they have not understood that it was their own behavior which led to these consequences. And I hate the division of this country at the moment over the European issue, on which I am not what most people expect. I very much favor the Norway option. I refused to take any part in the referendum campaign. I didn't vote in it. And people automatically assume, because I'm right-wing, that I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. It's not so. There are other positions which one can take, and I regret enormously, and looking back at the history of my own country, I can think only of the periods of Munich and Suez as comparable times when people genuinely stopped speaking to each other, which is a disaster for civil society. But it's not my fault. It's your fault for paying no attention whatever to the incessant attempts by people such as me to say to you, you've got this wrong. You're ignoring really important people. You're ignoring the poor in this country and the lives that they're living, and you will eventually pay the price. And now you're paying it.
Well,
and
now we've got that case.
My only pleasure in life, my only pleasure in public life,
is to say I told you so.
Is to say I told you so. Exactly. And that's what I am the chief of the I told you so industry, and all my books on the site which say I told you so are in the tent out there.
Well, now we're clear on that.
Donald Trump is an unpredictable, unstable person. He's not a strong and stable genius. He's a bull in a china shop. And to mix the metaphor, even a stop clock is right twice a day. And he was right to meet with the North Korean leadership, and he was right to encourage a rapprochement between North and South Korea, and it's going swimmingly. In fact, it's practically a love-in. The Koreans are embracing each other with a warmth and vigor that no one could possibly have imagined, and Donald Trump's predecessors would never have permitted. This is important. Barack Obama would never have met Kim Jong-un, and therefore the permafrost of North-South Korea relations would have continued. So, and not only would Barack Obama not have done it, Hillary Clinton would not have done it. And so if we are looking objectively at this thing, you have to say that Trump was right about Korea and the others were wrong, because Korea has been for decades a clear and present danger to world peace and stability. It's not that I'm passionately denouncing the rules-based international order. I'm passionately denouncing the fact that there is no rules-based international order. You just call lawlessness a rules-based international order with some mistakes, some breaches. But how many breaches does it take to invalidate your thesis in the first place? If you have what you call an international rules-based system in the world, which is not just breached, not just mistakes, but which kills millions of people and renders the whole world completely unstable. How many times does that need to happen before your thesis is invalidated? Now, for most people, it long ago ceased to be credible to call it a rules-based international order. And I refuse to accept your thesis, that's all.
I haven't got a thesis. I'm just asking you two what you think.
Well, your thesis is that there is an international rules-based order.
Oh, I see.
And my case is that it's abundantly clear that there has not been. And that therefore, attempts to exceptionalize Trump, which is the liberal mantra, are nonsense. He's only been in 23 months.
So if we hadn't
and the world was in total chaos before he came.
So if we hadn't had the United Nations and NATO set up after the Second World War, do you think the world would have been a better place?
No, because I believe in a United Nations with real authority. But as long as you have veto powers, it cannot possibly guarantee international order. I support the United Nations. It's Tony Blair and George W. Bush that walked out of the United Nations and caused the cataclysm, which is being, I think, underappreciated here, of the Iraq War. Not since the First World War did we take a decision that would so change the world as the decision to invade Iraq. Now, the United Nations, the late Kofi Annan, described that at the time as an illegal act. And yet it was carried out by people who pretend that they are presiding over a rules-based international order.
Certainly, the rise of authoritarian nationalist populism, paradoxically, depends on a dystopian vision of contemporary society, most notoriously in the American president Donald Trump, whose inauguration speech, whose campaign advertisements painted a picture of the country as consumed by war and terrorism and unemployment and failing schools. And paradoxically, that narrative was abetted, or at least it certainly wasn't countered by large segments of the left that kind of agreed that society is circling the drain. So not only was the populist message of decline not countered, but it also left large numbers of people disengaged from politics altogether. A lot of people who detested Donald Trump stayed home on election day figuring, well, Hillary Clinton, part of the same corrupt establishment, what difference does it make? And to some extent, Brexit passed by some of the same dynamic. Especially younger people who were opposed to Brexit stayed home on election day, and so the plebiscite went the way it did.
So you describe, voices on the alt-right, you describe them on the alt-left. Are you then the alt-center?
I never thought of myself that way, but in the chapter on reason, I point out that one of the biggest sources of unreason, of irrationality, is political tribalism. That people simply assume that all the solutions proposed by the left or the right, as the case may be, are known to be correct. As a result, become impervious to counter-arguments, to data, to evidence. I suggest that since none of us is omniscient or infallible enough to know what will solve society's problems, we have to take an open mind, look at, be informed by history, by data, by evidence, keep an open mind, and try to converge on the mix of policies that have proven themselves to result in the greatest benefits to human well-being. My favorite comment on the Trump Carnage inauguration speech came from former President George W. Bush, a man with whom I tend not to agree, to put it mildly. And he said, "That was some weird shit." Yeah. but speaking to your point, though, your observation about human psychology is correct. There is a well-documented phenomenon known as the negativity bias. One version of it is the phenomenon of loss aversion that Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky documented, that people dread losses more than they savor or anticipate gains. Criticism stings more than praise elevates. We have a better memory for things that go wrong than things that can go right. However, it is not true that political rhetoric, therefore, must appeal to the negative, because there have been fantastically successful politicians who have had a note of optimism, even in dark times, perhaps most famously.
Dark times.
Well, Franklin Roosevelt,
Yeah.
we have nothing to fear but fear itself.
Yeah.
On the right, Ronald Reagan, during a period of double-digit inflation and unemployment, had an optimistic message. Barack Obama, not so long ago, was elected twice with a message of hope and change. So it can be done by a skillful politician.
Perhaps things aren't miserable enough for Donald Trump's message to be overturned. So here's my question. With, you make a very coherent argument for looking on the bright side. You're a glass half full guy. How come there is really no politician of prominence in America that is able to come up with that message, or indeed in this country? Right? They're all busy hating
right now.
Trump. But where are the lovers of the other thing?
No, I think it's a good question. And by the way, it's the message of the book is not let's see the glass as half full. It's let's see how full the glass is. Again, the problem is this is not a book about optimism. This is a book about accuracy. The fact that global poverty has declined by 50% in 30 years is not looking at the bright side. It's a fact that people don't know.
So if we look at the European Union, who makes the basic decision? Yeah. Okay. It's not the national state. The basic decisions are made by a troika, the IMF, unelected European Commission, and the central bank operating in Brussels. And one of the reasons why you're seeing in Europe a spread of so-called populism, meaning opposition to the established institutions, to the centrist, center-left, center parties that have governed the country. Plenty of opposition to them, rage, anger, fear. Part of the reason is that the decision-making has in fact been further removed. It was always quite remote, but further removed from people themselves. And the decisions that are being made at the high level beyond popular control basically respond to the northern banks, not to the population. The level of what's called austerity, the version of neoliberalism, has had dire economic effects on large parts of the population, and it is angry, enraged people. When we turn here, is Trump listening to his constituencies?
Yeah.
No, he has one major legislative achievement so far, what economist Joseph Stiglitz properly calls the donor tax bill of 1917, a bill which harms the general population, harms Trump's constituency, benefits his actual constituency, which is concentrated wealth and corporate power. What we've been observing in the United States for the last year, in my view, it's a sensible system in which the figure in the White House focuses attention on himself, total media attention on Trump and his antics, and showing up the falsehoods of yesterday, which have now been forgotten, and so on. And while he's doing that, the more savage wing of the Republican Party, Ryan Connell and the rest, are ramming through legislation which is extremely harmful to their pretended constituency, their voters and everyone else, and in fact to the world in general. We cannot forget why the doomsday clock has moved for 2 minutes to midnight. That's an overwhelming fact, surpassing everything else we're discussing, and it's largely because of these actions that are being taken under the cover of Trump's antics. It's a good game, it plays very well, but it's extremely dangerous, and it's leading to rage, anger, irrationality, and sometimes support for charismatic figures who claim to represent it, but in fact they're working for other interests.
To watch all the full talks and debates from these highlights, find the links below in the description and subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas.